The morning sun cast gentle rays through the large windows of the community center, illuminating dust particles that danced in the warm air. Catherine Miller sat quietly in her wheelchair, her weathered hands folded neatly in her lap. At 87 years old, she had seen more sunrises than most people could count, but lately, each one felt more precious than the last. The community center buzzed with activity around her. Volunteers moved back and forth, setting up easels and arranging art supplies for the weekly painting class. Catherine had been attending these sessions for 3 years now, ever since her daughter Emma had first suggested it might be a good way to meet people and stay active after her husband Robert's passing. "Good morning, Mrs. Miller," called out Sarah, a young volunteer with bright red hair and an infectious smile. She was barely 25, fresh out of college with a degree in art therapy. Sarah had taken a special interest in Catherine from the very beginning, drawn to the older woman's quiet dignity and the way her eyes lit up whenever she picked up a paintbrush. Catherine smiled back, though the effort seemed to require more energy than it once had. "Good morning, dear. Beautiful day, isn't it?" Sarah noticed the slight tremor in Catherine's voice, the way she seemed smaller somehow than she had just a week ago. The doctors had been honest with Catherine and her family about her condition. The cancer that had started in her lungs had spread, and while the treatments had bought her some time, everyone understood that her days were numbered. "It certainly is," Sarah agreed, wheeling over an easel and setting it up in front of Catherine's usual spot. "What would you like to paint today? More flowers, perhaps? I know how much you enjoy those." Catherine's eyes moved slowly around the room, taking in the familiar faces of her fellow artists. There was Harold, a retired carpenter who painted landscapes with the same precision he had once used to build houses. Margaret, a former teacher, worked on delicate watercolor birds. Young Tommy, barely 16, and attending as part of his community service, surprised everyone with his abstract creations that seemed to capture emotions no one expected him to understand. "I think," Catherine said slowly, "I'd like to try something different today." Sarah raised her eyebrows with interest. Catherine had always been somewhat predictable in her artistic choices, gravitating towards safe subjects like flowers, simple landscapes, or still life arrangements. She painted with careful, measured strokes, creating pleasant, if unremarkable pieces that she would take home to Emma or give as gifts to her neighbors. "What did you have in mind?" Sarah asked, pulling up a chair beside Catherine. Catherine was quiet for a long moment, her gaze distant. "I've been thinking about my life lately," she said finally, "about all the things I've experienced, all the people I've loved. I wonder if it's possible to paint a lifetime." The question hung in the air between them. Sarah had worked with many elderly clients in her short career, and she had learned that near the end, many of them became reflective, wanting to capture or express something meaningful about their journey through life. "I think," Sarah said carefully, "that every painting tells a story about the person who creates it. Maybe we could start with what feels most important to you right now." Catherine nodded slowly. "When I was a little girl, I lived on a farm with my parents and my brother Michael. We didn't have much money, but we had each other. My mother used to say that love was the only thing that multiplied when you shared it." She paused, a gentle smile crossing her face. "I'd like to start there, I think." Sarah helped Catherine select her colors, watching as the older woman's hands moved with surprising steadiness once she began to work. Catherine started with broad strokes of green and blue, creating what looked like rolling hills under an open sky. But as she continued to paint, something remarkable began to happen. The other participants in the class started to take notice. Harold glanced over from his own canvas, his brush suspended in midair as he watched Catherine work. Margaret set down her watercolors entirely, drawn by something in Catherine's focused expression. "She's painting her childhood home," whispered Tommy to Margaret, having wandered over to get a better look. Indeed, Catherine was adding details now. A white farmhouse with a red roof, a tire swing hanging from an enormous oak tree, chickens pecking in the yard. But there was something more to the painting than just a simple rural scene. Catherine seemed to be capturing not just what the place had looked like, but what it had felt like. The colors were warmer than they should have been, the shadows softer. There was an almost dreamlike quality to the work that suggested memory rather than mere observation. As the morning progressed, other people began to drift over to watch Catherine paint. The cleaning staff paused in their work. Maintenance workers found excuses to walk by, and even Dr. Martinez, who ran the community center's health services, stopped by to observe. "I've never seen her paint like this before," Sarah murmured to Dr. Martinez. It was true. Catherine's usual careful, tentative style had been replaced by something more confident, more expressive. Her brush moved across the canvas with purpose, adding layers of meaning with each stroke. Catherine herself seemed unaware of the growing audience. She was completely absorbed in her work, occasionally pausing to study what she had created before diving back in. She added a small figure of a girl with pigtails sitting under the oak tree, reading a book. In the distance, she painted the silhouette of a woman hanging laundry on a line and a man working in a vegetable garden. "That's me," Catherine said softly, pointing to the little girl. "I used to sit under that tree for hours, reading everything I could get my hands on. My mother always said I was going to read myself blind, but she never stopped me. She understood that books were my escape, my way of traveling to places I thought I'd never see." Sarah found herself deeply moved by the simple scene Catherine was creating. There was something universal about it, something that spoke to anyone who had ever been loved unconditionally or had a place where they felt completely safe and accepted. "Tell me more about your family," Sarah said gently, settling more comfortably in her chair. She had learned that encouraging clients to talk while they painted often led to their most meaningful work. Catherine's brush continued to move as she spoke. "My father was a quiet man, but he had the gentlest hands. He could calm a spooked horse or comfort a crying child with just a touch. He taught me that strength wasn't about being loud or forceful. It was about being steady, reliable, someone people could count on." As she spoke, Catherine added more details to the figure in the garden. The man's posture was patient, careful, as he tended to rows of vegetables. Even in the simple painting, his love for the land and his family was evident. "And my mother," Catherine continued, "was the heart of our home. She could make a feast out of nothing, turn our little house into the most welcoming place in the world. She taught me that making people feel loved wasn't about grand gestures. It was about paying attention, about remembering what mattered to them." The figure hanging laundry became more detailed under Catherine's brush. She was small but strong, and there was something in her posture that suggested both hard work and contentment. "What happened to them?" Tommy asked quietly. The teenager had abandoned his own painting entirely, captivated by Catherine's story and the way it was unfolding on her canvas. "They lived long, good lives," Catherine said with a smile. "My father passed when I was 35, and my mother when I was 42. They both got to meet Emma, got to see me happy and settled. I always felt grateful for that." As the morning session drew to a close, Catherine set down her brush and studied her work. The painting was far from finished, but it already contained more emotion and meaning than anything she had created before. The childhood home seemed to glow with warmth and love, a perfect capture of safety and belonging. The room had grown quiet as people prepared to leave, but no one seemed in a hurry to go. There was something about Catherine's painting, about the story she had shared, that made everyone want to linger a little longer. "Will you continue working on this next week?" Harold asked, carefully cleaning his brushes. Catherine nodded. "I think so. There's so much more to tell." As Sarah helped Catherine clean up her supplies, she couldn't shake the feeling that something special was happening. In her training, she had learned about the phenomenon of terminal lucidity, the way some people near the end of life experience sudden clarity, energy, or creativity. She wondered if that might be what she was witnessing with Catherine. "Mrs. Miller," Sarah said as she helped Catherine into her coat, "would you mind if I stayed with you while you work on this painting? I'd love to hear more of your story." Catherine's eyes brightened. "I'd like that very much, dear." Emma arrived to pick up her mother a few minutes later, as she did every week. She was a busy woman in her late 50s, working full-time as a nurse while also caring for Catherine and managing her own family. But she never missed these Tuesday morning pickups, and She always made time to chat with Sarah about how her mother was doing. "She seems energized today," Emma observed, watching Catherine carefully transfer her painting to a carrying case. "Different somehow." Sarah nodded. She started telling us about her childhood while she painted. "I think this piece might be something really special." Emma looked at the painting with new interest. She had seen dozens of her mother's artworks over the years, pleasant, competent pieces that decorated Emma's refrigerator and filled scrapbooks. But this one was different. Even unfinished, it had a depth and emotional resonance that surprised her. "Mom painted that?" Emma asked, genuinely amazed. "She certainly did," Sarah confirmed. "And I think there's much more where that came from." As Catherine and Emma prepared to leave, Catherine turned back to Sarah one more time. "Thank you for listening today, dear. It's been a long time since anyone asked me to tell my stories." Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. "Thank you for sharing them with me. I'll see you next week." "Wouldn't miss it," Catherine replied with a warmth that made everyone in the room smile. After they left, Sarah stayed behind to help clean up the classroom. But she found herself thinking about Catherine's painting, about the way the older woman had seemed to come alive as she worked on it. There had been something almost magical about watching someone transform a blank canvas into a window to the past, a glimpse into a lifetime of love and memory. Dr. Martinez approached her as she was putting away the last of the art supplies. "That was remarkable to watch today," he said quietly. "I've never seen Mrs. Miller so engaged, so present." Sarah nodded. It's like the painting unlocked something in her, like she suddenly found a way to express everything she's been carrying inside. "You know," Dr. Martinez said thoughtfully, "in my experience, people near the end of life often find ways to share their most important stories. It's as if they instinctively know that their time is limited, and they want to make sure their legacy isn't lost." As Sarah drove home that afternoon, she couldn't stop thinking about Catherine's words. "I wonder if it's possible to paint a lifetime." The question seemed both simple and profound, touching on fundamental questions about art, memory, and what we leave behind when we're gone. She found herself looking forward to the next Tuesday more than she ever had before, eager to see what other stories Catherine might share, what other memories might emerge on her canvas. There was something about the older woman's quiet dignity and the depth of her experiences that made Sarah want to be a better listener, a better witness to the richness of a life well lived. That evening, Emma called Sarah, something she had never done before. "I wanted to thank you," Emma said when Sarah answered the phone. "I don't know what you did today, but my mother hasn't stopped talking about her painting. She's been telling me stories about her childhood that I've never heard before. It's like you've given her a voice for things she's been keeping inside." Sarah felt a warm glow of satisfaction. "I think the painting is giving her a way to process her memories, to make sense of her life's journey. Sometimes art can do that for people. Well, whatever it is, please keep encouraging her. I can see how much it means to her." As Sarah hung up the phone, she realized that Catherine's project was affecting everyone who encountered it. There was something powerful about watching someone near the end of life reflect on their journey with such clarity and grace. It reminded everyone present of the preciousness of time, the importance of love, and the value of really listening to the stories of those who have walked longer paths than our own. The stage was set for something extraordinary. Catherine had begun what would become her final artistic project, and none of them yet understood just how profound and touching the completed work would be, or how many lives it would touch in the weeks to come. The following Tuesday morning arrived with an unexpected chill in the air, but the community center felt warmer than ever when Catherine arrived. Word had somehow spread about her remarkable painting from the previous week, and several new faces had appeared in the art class. The regular participants greeted Catherine with a new kind of respect, as if they suddenly understood that they were in the presence of someone special. Sarah noticed the change immediately. Where once Catherine had been just another participant in the weekly session, now she seemed to command a quiet attention from everyone in the room. People positioned their easels where they could catch glimpses of her work, and conversations naturally turned toward questions about her life and experiences. "I brought some different brushes today," Sarah said, setting up Catherine's workspace with extra care. And I thought you might want to try some new techniques if you're feeling adventurous. Catherine smiled, her eyes already focused on the canvas from the previous week. The childhood scene she had created looked even more remarkable in the morning light, full of warmth and memory. But today, she seemed ready to add new layers to her story. I've been thinking about what comes next, Catherine said, adjusting her position in her wheelchair to get closer to the easel. After the farm, after childhood, there was so much that happened, so many people who shaped who I became. She picked up her brush and began to work on a new section of the canvas, extending the scene beyond the farmhouse and oak tree. With confident strokes, she started to paint what looked like a small-town main street, complete with storefronts and sidewalks. "Tell us about it," encouraged Margaret, who had given up any pretense of working on her own painting. She had positioned herself where she could watch Catherine work while appearing to focus on her watercolors. "When I was 18, I left the farm to go to teacher's college in town," Catherine began, her brush moving steadily as she spoke. "It was 1954, and the world was changing so fast. Young women were expected to become teachers or nurses if they wanted to work, and then give it all up when they married. But I loved learning, loved the idea of helping children discover the joy of reading and writing." As she painted, the main street began to come alive under her brush. She added details that suggested the 1950s, vintage cars, signs for local businesses, people in period clothing walking along the sidewalks. But more than that, she was capturing the feeling of hope and possibility that had characterized that era of her life. "There," Catherine said, painting a small figure of a young woman walking toward a brick building with large windows. "That's me on my first day of student teaching. I was so nervous my hands were shaking, but I was excited too. I felt like my whole future was spread out in front of me like an open book." Tommy leaned closer, studying the details Catherine was adding. "What was it like being a teacher back then?" Catherine paused in her painting to consider the question. "Different than today, certainly. We had fewer resources, larger classes. But there was something special about it too. Parents trusted us completely, and children came to school ready to learn. I had students who walked miles to get to our little schoolhouse, and they never complained." She began to paint the interior of the school, visible through the large windows of the building. Rows of wooden desks, a blackboard covered with neat handwriting, children with their hands raised eagerly. There was something about the way she painted the children's faces that suggested genuine joy in learning. "I had one student," Catherine continued, adding more details to the classroom scene, "a little boy named Timothy who couldn't read when he started 3rd grade. The other children teased him, and he was starting to believe he was stupid. But I could see the intelligence in his eyes, the way he solved problems when he worked with his hands." Harold looked up from his own landscape painting. "What did you do?" "I started staying after school with him, finding ways to connect letters and words to things he understood. We used building blocks to make letters, acted out stories, sang songs about phonics. It took months, but one day he picked up a book and started reading out loud. The look on his face." Catherine's voice trailed off as she carefully painted the expression of joy and wonder on one of the children in her classroom scene. Sarah found herself deeply moved by the story and by the way Catherine was bringing it to life on her canvas. Did Timothy continue to improve? Catherine's face lit up with pride. He became one of the best readers in the class. But more than that, he gained confidence in himself. He went on to become an engineer, built bridges, and highways all over the state. He still sends me Christmas cards every year, 40 years later. As Catherine continued to work, she began to add another scene adjacent to the school. This one showed the interior of what appeared to be a church social hall, with tables covered in white tablecloths and people dancing. "That's where I met Robert," Catherine said softly, painting a young man in a military uniform dancing with a young woman in a blue dress. It was a church social in 1958. He had just come back from Korea, and I was 22, still teaching. He was the most handsome man I'd ever seen, but more than that, he was kind. He made everyone around him feel important, feel heard. The dance scene took shape under her brush with remarkable detail. Catherine painted the expressions on the dancers' faces, the decorations hung around the hall, even the band playing in the corner. But what she captured most beautifully was the connection between the young couple at the center of the scene, the way they looked at each other as if they had found their home in another person. "Love at first sight?" asked Sarah with a romantic smile. Catherine chuckled. "Oh, goodness, no. I thought he was too confident, too sure of himself. And he later told me he thought I was too serious, too bookish. But we kept running into each other around town, and eventually he asked me to go see a movie. It was Bridge on the River Kwai, and we talked about it for hours afterward. That's when I realized that underneath all that charm was a man who thought deeply about things, who cared about the world." She continued to add details to the dance scene, but now she was also working on another section of the canvas, this one showing what looked like a small house with a white picket fence and a garden full of flowers. "We were married in 1960, Catherine said, painting a tiny bride and groom standing in front of the same church where they had met. It was a simple ceremony, but it felt like the whole world was celebrating with us. Robert got a job at the bank, and I kept teaching until Emma came along in 1963. The house scene grew more detailed as Catherine worked. She painted herself tending the garden while a small child played nearby. Robert appeared in the scene too. Coming home from work, his tie loosened, and his face showing the satisfaction of a man who loved his life. Those were golden years, Catherine reflected, stepping back to examine her work. We didn't have much money, but we had everything that mattered. Robert would come home every evening and play with Emma while I cooked dinner. After she went to bed, we'd sit on the front porch and talk about our dreams, our plans for the future. Dr. Martinez had stopped by the art room during his rounds. Drawn by the unusual energy he could feel even from the hallway. He stood quietly at the back of the room, watching Catherine work and listening to her stories. He had worked with terminally ill patients for many years, and he recognized what was happening. Catherine was creating something much more than a painting. She was crafting a legacy, a tangible representation of a life well lived. "Mrs. Miller," said a new voice from the doorway. Everyone turned to see a woman in her 30s with a small child in tow. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but I heard about your painting. I'm Jessica, Timothy's daughter." The room fell silent. Catherine looked up from her canvas, confused for a moment. Then, her face broke into a radiant smile. "Timothy? My Timothy?" "Yes," Jessica said, stepping into the room with her young son. "He couldn't come himself. He's working on a bridge project in another state, but he wanted me to find you. He's been looking for you for years, wanting to thank you properly for what you did for him." Catherine's eyes filled with tears. "He has a daughter and a grandson, 2 daughters and 3 grandchildren," Jessica corrected with a warm smile. "And he tells us all the story about Mrs. Miller, the teacher who taught him that he could do anything. When I heard you were here, painting your life story, I had to come meet you." Sarah watched this reunion with amazement. She was witnessing the way Catherine's life had rippled outward, touching other lives in ways that continued to matter decades later. "Would you mind if my son Lucas watched you paint for a little while?" Jessica asked. "Timothy always told me that you made learning feel like magic." Catherine gestured for Lucas to come closer, and the 5-year-old approached her easel with wide-eyed wonder. "What are you painting?" he asked in the direct way of children. "I'm painting my life," Catherine said simply. "All the places I've been, all the people I've loved, all the things that made me who I am." Lucas studied the canvas intently. "It's like a story, but with pictures instead of words." "Exactly right," Catherine said, clearly delighted. "Would you like to help me add something to it?" Under Catherine's gentle guidance, Lucas used a small brush to add a butterfly to the garden scene, his little tongue sticking out in concentration. When he finished, Catherine painted a small boy reading under the oak tree from her childhood scene. "That's you, Lucas," she said. "Reading is one of the greatest gifts anyone can give you. It lets you travel anywhere, meet anyone, learn anything." Jessica had tears in her eyes as she watched her son interact with Catherine. "Timothy was right about you," she said quietly. "You do make everything feel magical." As the morning session continued, More people seemed to appear as if drawn by an invisible force. Emma arrived earlier than usual to pick up her mother, but instead of waiting in the lobby, she came into the art room to see what everyone was talking about. When she saw the painting, Emma gasped audibly. Catherine had continued to expand the canvas throughout the morning, adding scenes that chronicled the journey from childhood through young adulthood and into marriage and motherhood. But it wasn't just a chronological account. It was a visual symphony of love, growth, and connection. "Mom," Emma said softly, "this is incredible. I had no idea you could paint like this." Catherine looked at her daughter with surprise. "I didn't know I could either, dear. It's as if the stories want to be told, and my hands just know how to tell them." Sarah noticed that Catherine's painting style continued to evolve as she worked. Where her earlier pieces had been careful and tentative, this work flowed with confidence and emotion. She was using color in new ways, creating depth and movement that suggested formal training she had never received. "How are you doing this?" Sarah asked during a quiet moment when Catherine was mixing new colors. "The technique, the composition, it's like you become a different artist." Catherine considered the question seriously. "I think maybe I'm painting with more than just my hands now. I'm painting with my heart, with my memories, with everything I've learned about love and life." When you know your time is limited, you stop worrying about making mistakes and start focusing on making meaning. As the group prepared to leave that day, Catherine's canvas had grown to encompass the first 30 years of her life. The farmhouse and school and church and first home were all connected in a flowing composition that seemed to move like a river, carrying the viewer through time and experience. "What comes next week?" Harold asked as he cleaned his brushes. Catherine smiled mysteriously. "Parenthood," she said simply, "and all the ways that loving Emma changed everything I thought I knew about myself." After everyone else had gone, Sarah stayed behind to help Catherine carefully wrap her painting. "Mrs. Miller," she said hesitantly, "would it be all right if I brought a camera next week? I think what you're creating deserves to be documented." Catherine nodded. "I think I'll be nice, dear. This painting feels important somehow, bigger than just me. Maybe others should see it." As Emma helped her mother to the car, she couldn't stop talking about the painting. "Mom, I think you might be creating something really significant. Have you thought about what you'll do with it when it's finished?" Catherine was quiet for a moment as she settled into the passenger seat. "I suppose I'll know when the time comes. Right now, I'm just grateful to have found a way to tell my story, to share what feels important about the life I've lived." That evening, Sarah found herself researching famous works of art created by elderly artists, people who had discovered new depths of creativity later in life. She was beginning to understand that what Catherine was creating was more than just a personal memoir in paint. It was a testament to the power of memory, love, and artistic expression to transcend the limitations of time and mortality. The word was spreading beyond the community center now. Jessica had shared the story with Timothy, who had called several of his old classmates. Emma had mentioned it to her coworkers at the hospital. Dr. Martinez had spoken about it to other healthcare professionals. People were beginning to understand that something special was happening in that small art room every Tuesday morning, and they wanted to be part of it. Catherine's painting was becoming more than art. It was becoming a gathering point for community, a reminder of the stories that connect us all, and a celebration of the simple truth that every life lived with love and purpose has something valuable to teach the world. The third Tuesday brought an unexpected crowd to the community center. Word about Catherine's remarkable painting had spread throughout the town, and people were arriving early, hoping to witness what many were calling something truly special. Sarah arrived to find the parking lot fuller than she had ever seen it, and the art room buzzing with quiet anticipation. Catherine seemed both surprised and pleased by the attention. She had grown noticeably thinner over the past week, her movements more deliberate, but her eyes remained bright with purpose. Emma had mentioned to Sarah that her mother had spent several evenings sitting quietly in front of photographs, as if preparing for this next phase of her artistic journey. "Are you ready for this?" Sarah asked softly, helping Catherine settle in front of her easel. The painting had grown significantly over the past 2 weeks, and Today, Sarah had arranged for a larger canvas to accommodate Catherine's expanding vision. I think so, Catherine replied, studying the work she had already completed. The scenes from her childhood, education, and early marriage created a flowing narrative that seemed to pulse with life and memory. Today feels important. Today, I get to paint about Emma, about becoming a mother. Sarah had indeed brought her camera, as promised, and she began documenting Catherine's process from the very beginning. She captured the way the older woman held her brush, the intensity of concentration on her face, the gentle way she approached each new section of the canvas. Catherine began that day's work by extending the house scene from the previous week, adding new rooms and details that suggested the passage of time. A nursery appeared, complete with a rocking chair and mobile hanging over a crib. The garden grew larger and more elaborate, showing the care of many seasons. When Emma was born, Catherine said, carefully painting a woman holding a baby by the nursery window, I thought I understood love. I had loved my parents, my husband, my students. But holding that tiny person in my arms, I realized I had only been practicing for this moment. The room had grown quiet, everyone straining to hear Catherine's soft voice as she worked. Even Tommy, who usually grew restless during the longer sessions, sat perfectly still, mesmerized by the story unfolding in paint and words. Robert was so nervous when I went into labor, Catherine continued, adding details to a scene showing a man pacing in a hospital waiting room. He must have walked 10 miles in that little room, checking his watch every few minutes. When the nurse finally brought Emma out to meet him, I watched through the glass as this strong, confident man just melted. He started crying right there in the hallway. Emma, who was watching from the back of the room, felt her own eyes fill with tears. She had heard pieces of this story before, but never with such vivid detail, never while watching it come to life under her mother's brush. Catherine worked for a while in comfortable silence, adding layers of detail to the domestic scenes. A birthday party with a small girl blowing out candles. A Christmas morning with presents under a tree. A school play with proud parents in the audience. Each scene was painted with such care and emotion that viewers felt they were looking at windows into actual memories. Motherhood changed everything, Catherine said eventually, working on a scene that showed her teaching Emma to read. I had to learn patience on a whole new level. Children don't learn on schedule, don't grow according to plans. They teach you to find joy in the smallest moments, and to worry about things you never even imagined. Dr. Martinez had positioned himself where he could observe both Catherine and the growing crowd around her. He had never seen anything quite like this in his 30 years of healthcare work. There was something almost therapeutic happening in the room, not just for Catherine, but for everyone witnessing her process. I remember Emma's first day of school, Catherine continued, painting a small girl with pigtails walking toward a school building while a woman watched from a car window. I was more nervous than she was. I had taught hundreds of children, but sending my own daughter into that world felt terrifying and wonderful at the same time. She paused to study the scene she was creating, then began adding new elements that showed Emma growing older. A teenager at a science fair, holding a blue ribbon. A young woman in a graduation cap and gown. Each new scene built upon the previous ones, creating a sense of time passing and lives evolving. Emma was such a bright child, Catherine said, obvious pride in her voice. But more than that, she was kind. She brought home stray cats and injured birds, convinced she could save them all. She stood up for children who were being teased at school. She wanted to be a nurse from the time she was 10 years old, because she said she wanted to spend her life helping people feel better. Margaret wiped her eyes discreetly. The story Catherine was telling, combined with the visual narrative she was creating, was touching something deep in everyone present. They were witnessing not just one woman's memories, but universal experiences of love, family, and the passage of time. Harold cleared his throat softly. What about the difficult times? Every family has challenges. Catherine's brush paused for a moment, and then she began working on a darker section of the canvas. The colors became more muted, the scenes more complex. She painted what appeared to be a hospital room, with a man lying in a bed and a woman holding his hand. When Emma was 15, Robert had his first heart attack, Catherine said quietly. We thought we were going to lose him. Emma and I spent weeks at the hospital, and I watched my daughter grow up overnight. She helped me stay strong when I wanted to fall apart, and I realized that parenthood isn't just about teaching your children. It's about learning from them too. The hospital scene was painted with remarkable emotional depth. Catherine captured not just the fear and uncertainty of that time, but also the way crisis can bring families closer together. She painted Emma as a teenager, but with an adult's compassion in her eyes as she comforted her mother. Robert recovered from that attack, Catherine continued, her brush moving to a happier scene. And we all learned to treasure time differently. We started taking family trips we had always put off, having family dinners every Sunday, telling each other I love you every single day. Sarah noticed that Catherine's technique continued to evolve as she painted. The emotional depth of the work was becoming more sophisticated, as if each memory she accessed unlocked new artistic capabilities. The way she used light and shadow to convey mood, the subtle expressions on the faces she painted, it was the work of someone far more experienced than the careful amateur who had started this journey just 3 weeks ago. How do you capture so much emotion in the faces? Asked a new voice from the crowd. Sarah turned to see a woman she didn't recognize, someone who had clearly come specifically to see Catherine's work. I paint what I remember feeling, Catherine replied simply. When I paint Emma learning to ride a bicycle, I don't just remember what it looked like. I remember the mixture of pride and terror I felt watching her wobble down the sidewalk. When I paint Robert reading bedtime stories to her, I remember how my heart felt watching these two people I loved most in the world creating their own special bond. She worked throughout the morning, adding scene after scene that chronicled Emma's journey from childhood through adolescence and into young adulthood. A high school graduation, a college acceptance letter, the pride of watching a daughter achieve her dreams of becoming a nurse. But Catherine also painted the bittersweet moments of parenthood. An empty bedroom after Emma moved out for college. The quiet dinners for two after years of family chaos. The gradual shift from being needed every day to being visited on weekends. People don't tell you about that part, Catherine said, working on a scene of herself and Robert eating dinner alone in their kitchen. How proud and sad you feel at the same time when your children become independent. You spend 18 years teaching them to leave you, and then you have to figure out who you are when they do. Emma stepped forward from the back of the room, unable to stay silent any longer. Mom, I never left you. I just started visiting instead of living here. Catherine looked up from her painting and smiled at her daughter. I know, dear. And that's one of the gifts of parenthood that I didn't expect. After all those years of loving someone who needs you, you get to discover what it's like to love someone who chooses you. She began working on a new section that showed family gatherings over the years. Holiday dinners, birthday celebrations, ordinary Sunday afternoons that had become precious in memory. But she also included Emma's husband when she married, and eventually grandchildren, showing how love multiplies rather than divides when families grow. I used to think that becoming a mother was the biggest change my heart could handle, Catherine reflected, painting herself holding a baby who was clearly meant to be her first grandchild. But becoming a grandmother taught me that love doesn't have limits. Every new person who joins your family creates new space in your heart you didn't know existed. Tommy had been quiet for most of the morning, but now he spoke up. Mrs. Miller, do you think everyone should have kids? Catherine considered the question carefully while she continued to paint. I think everyone should have someone to love and care for, she said finally. For some people, that's their own children. For others, it might be their students or their neighbors or children who need extra support. The important thing is finding ways to give love and help others grow. As the session drew toward its close, Catherine had filled another significant portion of her canvas. The scenes of motherhood and family life created a rich tapestry that spoke to the joys and challenges of raising children, the evolution of marriage through parenthood, and the way love deepens and changes over time. Sarah realized that people were no longer pretending to work on their own art. Everyone was completely absorbed in Catherine's project, in her stories, in the remarkable transformation of memory into visual narrative. The room had become something more like a theater than an art class, with Catherine as both performer and artist, creating something unprecedented. "What comes next?" asked Dr. Martinez as people began to gather their things. Catherine smiled mysteriously. "Next week I think I'll paint about Robert, about marriage, about partnership, about learning to love someone through all the seasons of life, about what it means to build a life with another person." As people began to leave, many stopped to thank Catherine, to tell her how much her stories and her art meant to them. Sarah noticed that several people were wiping away tears, clearly moved by what they had witnessed. "Mrs. Miller," said an elderly man Sarah didn't recognize, "I lost my wife last year, and listening to you talk about your family, watching you paint these memories, it's helping me remember the joy instead of just the loss. Thank you for that." Catherine reached out and squeezed the man's hand. "Love doesn't end when someone dies," she said gently. "It changes form, but it doesn't disappear. Your memories of your wife are still alive in your heart." After everyone else had gone, Emma approached her mother's easel to study the day's work more closely. "Mom, this is extraordinary. You're creating something that I think will matter to a lot of people." Catherine looked at the painting with fresh eyes, as if seeing it from Emma's perspective for the first time. "I hope so, dear. I hope that somehow sharing my story helps other people appreciate their own stories, their own love, their own families." Sarah carefully documented the day's additions to the painting, taking photos from multiple angles to capture the incredible detail Catherine had achieved. She was beginning to understand that this project was becoming something much larger than a personal art therapy exercise. Catherine was creating a visual autobiography that spoke to universal experiences of love, family, and human connection. "Will you be able to finish it?" Emma asked quietly, the question neither of them wanted to voice directly addressing Catherine's declining health. Catherine was quiet for a long moment. "I think I'll finish exactly what I'm meant to finish," she said finally. "Sometimes the most important things don't get completed the way we planned, but they get completed the way they're supposed to." As they prepared to leave, Sarah noticed that Catherine moved more slowly than she had the week before, but her eyes remained bright with purpose. Whatever time she had left, she was using it to create something beautiful and meaningful, something that honored the life she had lived and the love she had experienced. The painting was becoming more than art. It was becoming a legacy, a gift to everyone who witnessed it, and a testament to the power of memory and love to transcend the limitations of time and mortality.